Clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Either way, we're recording now, so I guess we might as well. And I hate
Brian, I just need one help with prep on this. What's a poll? Can you explain that to me?
Well, I think it was how we got our name, I believe, came from polling. I don't know, Reagan. At least last time I looked.
We don't know anything about polling here.
Yeah.
It's not our favorite thing to do ever, all the time.
Well, poll results are like Christmas presents. I mean, it just isn't it part of the intrigue of the job? And you can either be, extremely excited based on what you see, or you can be confronted with the reality of the situation, and you get that, feeling in the pit of your stomach.
Reagan said that on the last pod. He was like, getting that email from your pollster is like, it's just so you're just like, oh God, I gotta open it up. And then you're half afraid and you're half excited, right? And then because it can either hit you like a gut punch or it can really just be like, yes. And then you sit there and you start diving into it and try to figure out what it means. So
Jerry Seinfeld has a bit where he talks about the minute between when you see the advertisement about the product and buy it, and that time between when you bought it and when it arrives. That's the best time in your life because you know that whatever you're buying isn't going to fix your life. It's just junk that you're adding to your life. But the idea of fixing your life is great. And that's what polling is like. You're not going to get a polling result that doesn't tell you don't have to campaign or you don't have more work to do. You still have all that work to do, but the time between when you order the poll and when you're going to get some great results, like the idea of that is great.
yeah, it really is. All right, so we're here with J.L. Wilson, the owner, the chief scientist, the nerd, right, of Nelson Research, and also a lobbyist on top of all those other things. But always and foremost, I think J.L. has always been a big pollster. He loves doing polling and stuff. I think he likes numbers and research. Am I correct, JL?
Yeah, I just like the insight. I like helping people make decisions more than anything. And actually, political polling is not our forte. It's not necessarily our bread and butter. It is what we do to a certain extent, but largely we have been in the business of helping school districts, local governments, business entities make decisions based on, the data that we reveal and uncover in our polling. So that is the part of polling I enjoy. But I also know we're in the political season, and that there's a certain amount of intrigue with what we see, and particularly when there's sort of a vacuum of information, like in this primary. I thought, we were kind of kicking around how to improve our internal processes and things like that. So I thought, you know what, let's just go out with a poll and refine some of our own internal processes. But we collect this data as a way to do that. But I thought we captured a pretty good look at the race as it stands basically today, and I think this is probably pretty accurate accounting for how the GOP governor's race looks right now.
Is polling? I've heard from pollsters and I've heard some different, but polling in primaries is statewide's probably a little bit easier because at least you get a statewide sample of people to grab. But it is harder to do, right? It takes a little more work, a little bit more to find enough likely voters within the Republican that's a cross section, right, of age, geography, and stuff. It's a little bit more difficult.
I have not found it that challenging to get a representative sample. The challenging aspect, and I always tell somebody who wants primary polling something like this: you're going to be extremely disappointed with the results that come back, and I would even challenge you to even invest in the polling, because what's going to happen if you run a poll in, say, an open House district race, you're going to get candidate A at 11%, candidate B at 8%, with 81% undecided. And it's not like you're not going to have a problem getting your sample. You will get your sample. It's
Mhm.
just the reality is most people aren't paying attention.
Yep.
The name ID hasn't sunk in. And so you're going to get just what I feel is very little usefulness out of the data, particularly, in a small May election, House race, Senate race where there's not an incumbent involved. But with respect to the governor's race, different story. Unlike 4 years ago, where at this time you still had half your electorate undecided, most people have kind of picked their horse.
Mm.
And you see that in the initial first run, where we asked the who's ahead question, and the undecided was only at 30%. And that's because you probably had a higher level of name ID, particularly for Christine Drazen, Ed Deal, Chris Dudley. The three of those have over 50% name ID. So, people have started to form their opinions of those candidates, and, they picked who they like.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, Reagan, any more background you want to put in there before he
Yeah,
kicks
I
to the
think
drum roll?
people would be interested to know methodology wise, are we doing texting, live calls, IVR, online, some combination of all of the above?
Yeah, it's a mixed mode. I mean, we will go with a text to web. So SMS based, and then we will also complement that with live call. And most of the live call today also happens on cell phones with some landline mixed in. The upshot is we're trying to hit demographic quotas. That's very important to get a representative sample of your electorate. We also apply a likely voter screen. One of those is just simply asking likelihood of voting, but you also, kind of cross-reference that with voter history. But it's very important that you get the dispersion correct. You get your male-female quotas correct. You get your age, as close as you can. It's a little more challenging to get the younger demographic, but I think we captured it pretty well.
Are
Great.
younger Republicans even going to vote?
Well, they're probably not with the frequency, and
Yeah.
so the percentage won't be as high as you would find with a voter age 60 plus.
Yeah, I was pulling some data just for some legislative primary stuff, and it's amazing. Like if I say, hey, just show me only 60 plus Republican voters that are 3/4s, 4/4 voters, and then you pull and then you take it off, and like it's basically just 60 plus. I mean, there's really not a lot of frequency amongst Republican voters, especially younger than 40, which is really rough. But yeah, it's pretty amazing. So if you're not talking to seniors and the older Republican voters in a primary, you're not going to win.
I
So
think that is a feature of the Republican voting base at this time. I would agree with that.
probably not good for us long term in Oregon to have our voter base be that old.
Well,
So
another unique feature of the Republican voting base is it's majority male. And so, most of the time but polling a legislative district, it'll typically be 52% female, 53% female. The Republican electorate's actually slightly over 50% male.
wow, huh? All right. Well, now that we've done the drum roll, the results of your poll.
Sure. And we fielded this last Wednesday and Thursday. And so we were actually wrapping up the sample around the time that the debate or the forum was taking place on that Thursday evening. A 515 sample, so it's very robust. I do have the benefit of having polled it in March, which I can allude to for a different client. So I have a kind of an understanding of the trajectory of the race and can allude to that. But a 515 sample is going to be a margin of error of about 4.3%. It was a robust sample, and you start to see trends take place right at the outset. And what you're interested in, does that change over the course of the survey when you acquire more sample size? And so, it's funny for you on the receiving end. It's like you get this Christmas present of what my data looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I can have a pretty good idea what it's going to look like just a fraction of the way through. And what I'm interested in is whether the trends hold. But, in terms of, what I could say about the results, given that we've established we hit the demographic quotas, it was a very robust sample size. About 74% have a favorable opinion of President Trump. With respect to the candidates, Christine Drazan has the highest name ID at about 92%. Chris Dudley has a very high name ID also at about 76%. Ed Deal's name ID is about 64%. And then between David and Danielle, obviously they haven't had the ability to really set, the bar for a robust name ID for themselves. But we have Danielle's name ID at about 40% and David's at about, actually we have his at about 52%. So he is, I would say he is surprisingly well known. And one of the things that we, observe in the data, he certainly has constituency.
Hmm.
Uh, there are certain places where he really pops. So, the candidates I would say are fairly well known, especially compared to 4 years ago when everybody was largely unknown. And I think that's why you're seeing more certainty in
Hmm.
in preferences this time around as opposed to 4 years ago. So we asked the top line question, just who's ahead? Who are you voting for? And we ask it twice, and I'll get into that in sort of my the reason we do that. But the first round, which we call the hard ballot, you had Christine Drazan coming in at 31%. That she'd actually gained a couple points since the March poll. We had Ed Deal at basically 15.5%, which was about static where he was. He was surprisingly strong 30 days ago, but he hadn't moved much.
Hmm.
And then Chris Dudley, we had in the initial poll at 14.8. He was the biggest mover because he was under 10% 30 days ago. Clearly, his effort to be known among voters and his ad campaign and whatever had elevated him from just under 10 now to just under 15. So your top three vote getters, Drazen at 31.1, Deal at 15.6, Dudley at 14.8. So those were your top three. You
And did
did
you
have
say that Drazen was up some?
come again?
Did you say that Drazen was up some as well from the past poll that you had done?
Yes.
Okay.
So Drazen about a month ago was probably, 27, 28. So she'd come up about 4 points. What we had noticed is that Dudley came up about 5 points. And then Ed had largely stayed around the same. We've always
Okay.
had Medina at around 6 or 7%. He came in at 6.1. And we'd always had Danielle at between 1 and 2%, and she came in at just under 1%. But I think the important thing here is 7 out of 10 voters on the Republican side have already kind of made up their mind.
Yep.
Yeah.
Uh, and so you've got 30% undecided. So what we do is we ask the question a second time. And we kind of press in a little bit. And so for those that are undecided, we basically ask them, if you absolutely had to choose today, which candidate would you lean toward? And then we randomize the name selection and ask people. What I'm really looking for there is where your next marginal vote's going to come from. And usually that's a reflection of who they've heard from last, name ID, somebody who's resonated with them some way. But what I'm really looking to capture is where we think the next marginal vote's going to come from. So on that, Drazen leads again with 5.8%. Chris Dudley at 3.3, Ed Deal at 2.0, and then Bethel and Medina at under 1. So what that informs me is that about 50% of the next marginal vote is going to go to Drazen. And a little less than 50%, say 30%, is going to come to Dudley and Deal. So given that scenario, given that Christine is, her hard ballots at 31 and, Deal and Dudley are there around 15, and that Christine is kind of winning the battle for the next marginal vote. It's hard for me to see how, Chris or Ed catch up in that scenario, because if Christine is also capturing the plurality, if not the majority of the next marginal vote, and creating that, that separation, or maintains that separation, it's just hard for me to see how Ed or Chris are able to bridge that gap. I'm not saying it can't be done, but if the data would have come back that the next marginal vote, belongs to Dudley, because his ad spend has been very, very significant, then I would say, okay, well, it looks like we could be headed to a photo finish. Oh,
Right.
or maybe Ed catches fire and you have a similar situation, but they're not getting the majority of what we consider the next marginal vote. So it's hard for me to see, how they're able to bridge that gap. I'm not saying it can't be done. It's just saying at that snapshot in time, it looks like they've got a lot of ground to cover.
And if you're Dudley or Deal at this point, because I mean, what you're showing, and then another candidate gets 1% of the vote, so there isn't anybody else in the field that is relevant. Um, Bethel really isn't relevant. Medina, I think, is as relevant as he needs to be because I don't know that this race, I don't know that he got into this race to win it. He's a media personality, and so I think that it's likely that he's accomplished a lot of his goal in terms of raising the name ID of, whatever he's going to do next with the media thing. So it really looks to me like a Drazen Dudley Deal campaign. But the biggest thing that Deal doesn't have is he doesn't have a ton of cash in the bank unless he's making more additional loans. And even with Dudley having money in the bank, you basically have to hope if you're either their supporters or you're either their campaigns, they already have plans in motion to get aggressive on the messaging because right now, I think if you run a positive only campaign that doesn't have anything about it that is special or unique or anything like that, I mean, this is what we look at on election day. You'll see basically this where Deal and Dudley's votes come from different segments of the electorate and they're added up about the same, maybe, or a little less than Drazen, but Drazen's going to run away with it basically with almost 20 points up.
Yeah, like I said, I think that the picture is pretty clear. I think, Dudley probably has the best ability to make up the gap, given that he
Yeah.
has, a lot of the ad spend left. But you look in the crosstabs, and you kind of look at where his vote's coming from. It feels like there's a ceiling, because he's really, when you look at the crosstab between those that consider themselves moderate in the party. And we had actually identified, which felt a little high to me, that 3 in 10 Republican voters identified themselves or their preference as being a moderate
Hmm.
candidate, which really felt high to me, but it is what it is. That's where Dudley's base was coming from. And for those that consider themselves a traditional conservative, and then we had another category, sort of the America First Trump Republican, that is 4 out of 10. He wasn't pulling much out of those two buckets. He was really pulling from the moderate bucket, and then he was. You'll find in the crosstabs too, those who had an unfavorable impression of President Trump, he was the runaway candidate for those who had real,
Hmm. Yes,
dissatisfaction
I
with
see
Trump.
that.
So it feels to me like the pool that he has to pull from is fairly limited. You look at Ed on the other hand, Ed is, I think, geographically constrained, obviously doing very well in the Mid Valley, almost certainly on par with Christine, but he's just getting blown out in the population centers, particularly the metro, which, you know, Clackamas County is the biggest single concentration of Republicans, and Christine is just miles in front there.
Yeah.
The Southern Oregon, when you talk about that I-5 between Roseburg and Medford, is another tranche. 18% of your Republican. He's not performing well there. So he feels kind of limited to the Willamette Valley.
Yep.
So he's going to struggle in those areas unless he has, a plan to reach those voters in 30 days. I'll give Medina props. He clearly has a constituency, but you'll notice in the crosstabs, it's in the 18 to 39.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And the problem there, of course, is do they show up or not? And so, everybody's got their little places where they're very strong. Generally speaking, Christine is strong across all domains. And the way I personally interpret the data, she does appear to be the candidate that is kind of coalesces, both ends of the party. Better than I think Ed speaks to one part of the party very well. Um, Chris speaks to one part of the party very well. Even David speaks to a part of the party very well. But Christine kind of crosses all domains.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like I was looking at the crosstab, and she does really well with older voters. Christine does too, and that's older voters are also harder to switch, change minds, and stuff like that too. Like if they've made up their mind, like their hard ballot is for Christine. Because I would look at this if I was that deal. Because you said catch fire. I'm like, if you haven't caught fire by now, I mean, you're not catching fire, right? You've caught all the fire you're catching without money, because money can buy you some fire, because it's gasoline for campaigns. So, but if you don't have the gasoline, to your point, like if he had a $300,000 ad buy on Portland TV, maybe he could catch some fire with the message that resonates, right, and pull some of those. But there's not enough with 30% undecided. Really, I don't know if there's not enough, because those people are leaning a certain way. And Christine has money. If Christine didn't have money, and because I've gotten 4 mailers from Christine at this point, not one from the other candidates, by the way, none.
Same. Exactly the
And
same. Two guns, two pro-life abortion mailers.
yeah. Well, I'm not. I haven't gotten 2 pro-lifers. You're more pro-life than me, I guess, Reagan. Um, but I think Dudley. I think the biggest mistake he made is he waited too long. This people have made up their mind based on looking at this polling, and there's not enough time, not enough runway left in the campaign to catch fire without getting aggressive on your messaging and looking at his TV ads. They're fine and stuff for name ID, and they're good. Oregon needs a rebound. That's kind of catchy. Fits who he is, reminds people of where he came from. But I don't see where, and I think Ed just ends up at right around where you got him, JL. I see him at probably 16, 17%. I see Dudley at like 22, and I see Christine winning with about 30. And then everybody else will sprinkle below that. But based on where your trends are going, somewhere within there, give a couple of points. But it sure doesn't seem like there's an opportunity. I don't see anything in your crosstabs that would strike as an opportunity unless you strike at Christine. And I don't know if any of those guys have the will to do that, nor the money. I mean, Dudley's the only one that has the money.
Well, I think, you get at something. Why do candidates go negative? And candidates go negative to try to, first of all, tear down the numbers of the front runner and to try to create some product differentiation. And you're inevitably going to see it if someone really, I know that there's a desire for party unity, because I heard that expressed in the event on Thursday. And so upsetting that apple cart is going to require somebody to take a plunge and say, hey, I want to win this thing. And to do that, I've got to take real shots at the front runner. You're going to have to see that fairly quickly in order for that to have any chance of success. And so, somebody's going to have to reach a decision point whether I actually want to pull the trigger on that or not. Because if all things being equal, the people, the candidates are just kind of playing patty cake with each other, there's going to be no change in this outcome at all.
No. Could Medina come out and endorse a deal with that? You think that using that platform to change, because he's clearly not going to win. He's going to do fine. I guess if I was friends with Medina, I might say, hey, listen, you're young and this is a good opportunity for you to come in 4th place in a very, I would say, just a very well-respected and accomplished field. To come in 4th is pretty good for a young guy like that. But if he gave his weight behind a deal, maybe there's some opportunity there. But I don't know. Just kind of curious your thoughts on that. But
I think it would
coalescing.
potentially inject a little fuel. I do consider those two as having sort of crossover appeal with each other. So I
Okay.
do think it would probably inject a little fuel into Ed's campaign, but I don't think enough vis-a-vis Christine to bridge the gap.
You would the other thing too that is fascinating, and you pointed this out, and I think this gets missed a ton, is the regionality of these primaries. It's true in legislative races when you have two candidates from different parts of the district. I think that matters a ton. But also here, like there's a scenario where Bethel does better, but because her base is in the valley, she just got absolutely crushed by Deal's entry into this race. She's been in it longer, but he has just way more voters. And you could see a scenario where she builds a campaign out of being the only candidate from the valley, but because she isn't, she just got, I mean, completely rolled over on that front, I think. And I think that regional problem, and then like you mentioned before, Drazen is well known and has represented the largest Republican county, the
Yeah.
county with the largest amount of Republican voters in Clackamas, and I think that's super important and has been very helpful to her this whole time, allowing her. And Dudley, I mean, Dudley lives in Central Oregon, but I wouldn't necessarily say he's super duper strong out there. I think he has a little bit more of ability to get to those voters in a way that some of these other candidates can't. But I don't think he's got the strong power base you'd expect if he had been more politically active there um, over the last 10 years or 15 years.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Central Oregon is probably only 7 to 8% of that electorate. I mean, the real juice is in the Mid Willamette, Clackamas and Washington, and that I-5 between,
Yep.
basically Roseburg and Medford. That is going to account for what, 75% of your Republican electorate. I mean,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. I have the strongest affinity for Eastern Oregon and the people who are there. I always marvel at the time candidates spend in John Day or Burns or those places. I mean, although it's
Yeah.
God's country, that is just not where the people are. And I know
No.
it feels kind of like comfort food if you're a
Yep.
Republican, because you're kind of with your people, but your voters are actually
No. Yeah.
congregated in three sections of the state.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I'm always surprised when people aren't just absolutely pounding those three.
It's my Central Oregon raising and bias towards, former Republican leadership from that area, I guess. Some of which I am related to, some of which I am not.
Oh,
But you're right. No, and I think that also it's so interesting because there is though, and I am aware of this. I've talked to folks out there. The folks from Eastern Oregon, they do make a decision. It's a little bit like New Hampshire where there's just no voters there. There's no electoral votes there. But if you like don't go there and make it a key part of your early campaign, being in New Hampshire, being in Iowa, then you kind of get spurned and there's momentum that
mm,
you can build there. And same thing I think for Eastern Oregon, where it's sort of like if you don't go there, it actually starts to become a problem for you because that gets around with the folks in Eastern Oregon and it can turn into a little bit of a problem. So I'm not telling candidates don't go there, but know where the voter breakdown is and make sure you're spending enough time where almost 80% of the voters is, I think is a good recommendation. I mean, you've got just as many voters on the coast as you do in Eastern Oregon, which is crazy.
Probably
Not
more.
including Central. I want to make that clear. I look at Central Oregon as separate from Eastern. It always has been. It always will be. And anybody who calls Central Oregon Eastern Oregon always takes a step down just slightly
wow.
for me. And so I like
Wow.
JL
Just
that you've
hating on your
broken it
boss.
out. No,
Are
no,
you
no, no.
hating on your boss right now? I feel like you are because Cook County, I mean, we straddle the line between Eastern Oregon and Central Oregon. I mean, we really do, but
But we
A debate for another
characterize
time.
we characterize Crook as central. And in fact, so our Central Oregon demographic runs up 97 from Deschutes
Yeah,
up to Wasco.
yeah.
yeah,
No, that's the correct way to do it,
I
JL.
know.
Good job.
Stop. Stop. I'm with you guys though. I remember because I worked on the '06 and then Dudley's campaign in 10. And I remember like, Saxon was, getting on a plane and he was flying down. And at that point, Ben didn't really even have that many people. And they were like, oh, we're sending him here and then here. And I'm like, why is he even here? Like we're good. Like I have all of our counties nailed down. You take all 16 counties east of the mountains over here, and it wouldn't even equate to Clackamas County. So it's like, why are you even here? Like, get out of here. And I remember yelling at the campaigns, like, and this is in October, like, get out of here. We're fine. We're all voting Republican. Like, go over there where the people are. And I think the same thing in these primaries. I think Dudley's biggest appeal is in the Valley. And it is amazing how much time you spend in Wallowa or, Burns or something when there's literally a handful of voters over there. And I mean, I don't see Christine. I mean, she's gone to those areas, but which I think you have to do to Reagan's point. But I mean, I would be holding all my events and plowing all my media and everything into like, especially like Eugene and Southern Oregon, because those are cheap markets too, relative to Portland's market. I'd spend a ton of TV down there because it's probably a sixth of the price. So, and you're getting a lot of value out of it. So, yeah.
One
Well,
of the things I'm looking at in the crosstabs too is what percentage of the people who like you are you capturing? And
Mm,
Christine has a 64% favorable rating. I mean,
yeah.
first of all, 90% of the voters have heard of her. And of the 90%, two-thirds really like her.
yeah.
And so she is capturing almost 50% of the people who say that they like her. She's capturing 50% of that vote. Nobody else is even close. Like you look at like Chris is favorable. Chris's next favorable is at basically 44%. He's splitting his favorable almost 50-50 with Christine, which means
Yeah.
people who like Chris, they might like him. Like we like maybe like all the candidates,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
50% of the people who say they like him are voting for somebody else.
No
Uh,
one in this field is hated. And I think that's interesting too, because if you spend any time online, you wouldn't necessarily think that. And it tells you how not reflective of reality the social media primary is compared to the actual primary.
I say that, I mean, there's a lot happening on social media. The reality is when you think about the Republican voter, say it's a 60-year-old female, do you think that they're plugged into anything that's being said on X or it's just not.
Oh,
And
No.
so there's a very limited universe for that back and forth that's on
yep.
social media. Most of the voters are completely disconnected from it. So I always think about what does grandma think? How's grandma processing this race? And when you kind of think about it that way, it's easy for me to see Christine's appeal.
I agree. Yeah, I think it should be either way. It's been a good primary, been a fun primary. I'm not going to hang it up yet because I still think there's enough time to do something, but it clearly has to come out of Dudley's camp who has money. I would never loan yourself money like Ed Deal did. I think that's just wild, especially looking at polling. You'd assume he had polling and he thought if I just had 100 grand, I'm going to get myself over the top. I just, you know, a good run, I think there, but I think we got to have money to play in a game. And what I saw, what you just said about Christine is I don't think a tax will work on her because she's liked. So if you attack, that could actually backfire against you and galvanize those
Good.
supporters for Christine. So attack ads and primaries are very tricky.
And I would say that her unlikable, so she's at
Yeah, I
16% that
saw that.
don't have, I kind of feel like that's tapped out. It's hard for me to see that number going much higher. But the people that don't have a favorable view for are split kind of evenly between Ed and Chris. And so there's not even a candidate that the people that don't like her are galvanizing around.
Yeah.
I will say this about Ed. I think Ed is really punching above his weight with respect to the people that like him relative to his name ID. I mean, his favorability is almost on par with Dudley's, with almost none of the money spent and a name ID that is significantly less. So I think that he is speaking to a broad swath of the party, but I agree in the absence of resources to build the name ID, it's just not it just it has a ceiling.
He'll
Mhm.
do great on the cost to vote uh, calculation. He just
Yeah, it's true.
doesn't look like he's going to win the primary, which usually you want to do if you're the candidate. But we'll see. I think there's a window, like Brian said, but it's narrow and closing fast. And if
Super fast.
Drazen has a bunch more mail lined up hitting high turnout Republican voters, of which Brian and I are one, and which is why we're getting a lot of this mail, then
No, we're not even in the age demo. I mean, you're like in the Medina age demo, Reagan, and I'm at least getting into the higher demo. But
I wasn't going to point this out, but I am going to point it out. I'm going to the crosstabs right now. I don't have any explanation for this, but Medina gets like 30% of the 18 to 35 female vote, and maybe that's why he's in the primary. I don't know if he's married or not, but he could be there. I don't know. It's just something I noticed. It was abnormally high.
yeah,
So I'm pointing it out. Well, thanks, JL. This is fascinating stuff. Thanks for bringing us the crosstabs, and really appreciate you coming on to share this with us.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.